You see, the news is starting to come out that central banks are going to adopt digital currencies. If you remember, this started getting floated by, I think Facebook Libra was one of the first. They came up with this idea of creating a global basket of currencies that were digital, and they would have this foundation in Switzerland, and that global basket would be a new world currency which could be used for the internet to interact on. The central banks looked at that and said, no, you're not doing this because this really is redefining the rules of currency. And what you're going to create, it was basically a stable coin, but what you're going to create is something that's out of our control. Now, they kind of don't mind Bitcoin yet, and we'll come on to that later. They've observed it, they've seen it, and they're learning from it. But Libra was too groundbreaking. Mark Carney then raised it last year. The BIS had written some things about digital currencies, and some other governments had looked at it too. But Mark Carney put the shot across the bow at Jackson Hole last year, where he said that what Libra was doing was probably the future. That this system where something like 79% of all transactions on Earth are in dollars, yet the US is only 25% of global GDP. How does that work? This leads to these dollar shortages, these problems where countries like South Africa are beholden to the US dollar, or Brazil or Argentina, when really their trading partners may be elsewhere, but the dollar rules all. It is so all-encompassing, so powerful as a reserve currency that it's breaking the very system we're in. We've got problems where a dollar abroad, the offshore dollar, the euro dollar, is non-fungible with a dollar in the US. So the Federal Reserve, if it tries to accommodate companies that have borrowed dollars in the international markets, have lent to the corporate. We've also then hit COVID. And COVID was like that 2008 moment, or the European moment 2012, where everything stopped. All of the trends hyper-accelerated. The trend I'm more interested in was really the trend of governments having to use central banks to backstop them to create enormous fiscal stimulus. So we've seen the largest fiscal stimulus by any measure the world has ever seen. Basically, the central banks have printed money to allow it to happen. Now, most of us knew this was coming, but the scale of it has been shocking. And it's not finished yet. I think COVID is around for a lot longer than people realise, and the situation in Europe is only going to get worse, and I think the US will too, and it's going to require more and more stimulus. I'm not entirely sure how the Europeans are going to keep hold of their banking system in the middle of this, and I feared for a long time it may end up getting nationalised. But against that backdrop of this extreme situation where governments really can't print more money because they just have constraints within their parliamentary systems, and yet central banks are telling them they need to do more and we'll try and backstop you. This is an awkward situation that nobody knows how to deal with, but the central banks are pushing to say we need more. Then we start getting the ECB talking about a central bank digital currency, a digital euro or e-euro. Well, that's interesting. Why are they doing that? Next was the IMF, out this week, papers about digital currencies. Then we've seen it from the Department of Justice in the US. We've seen it from the agreement in the US for certain banks to custody Bitcoin and other digital assets, allowing them to come into the system. We've seen a whole bunch of these things, and the IMF tomorrow on Monday, so by the time you see this, will have had a speech about this, a whole panel, including Jay Powell. The Cleveland Fed has written about it, and many others. People are talking about it everywhere. The drumbeat is getting louder. They're going towards central bank digital currencies. So what does that mean? Surely currencies are digital now anyway. When you can pay with your credit card, you can transfer money. Well, this is very different. But okay, so we've got the central bank digital currency. And if you see the nice fluffy way the IMF have dressed it up, it's, well, we've got a cross-border payments platform so you don't have to use those awful wire transfer systems. But it also means that people don't need the SWIFT transfer system, which is what creates the backbone of the US dollar. I'm not dollar bearish yet, and I think it will morph into that. I'm actually still extremely dollar bullish. But when we look at this, they're trying to create payment rails, so they say. And that's great. We need to be able to just instantly transfer from our mobile phone from one person to another. I can send money to my mum in Spain, she gets it instantaneously, like it works for Bitcoin. Beautiful. You see, central banks want to be able to give people money directly, direct monetization. They can't do that right now. Right now, they print money, it goes into the banking system, the banks hoard it because we're going through a credit crunch. So that's very typical action. They keep their reserves higher than normal and the money doesn't get into the system. So only the best creditors get access to the money, which doesn't help when you've got a solvency problem when people who don't get all the credit, who can't issue bonds, let's say they're not a giant corporation, they can't issue bonds, they can't get credit, they go to the wall. So if you remember, the government started giving direct payments, this $1,200 and other such payments to corporates and loans. But it's clunky to go through government. We've seen some of the payments didn't happen. It was slow to get off the ground. There was no easy way to do it. So the central banks think, we've got no monetary policy left, so why don't we do the fiscal? So in times of crisis, and this is how it'll get solved, we can do it directly. We can circumvent everybody, put it straight on our balance sheets and give you money, you in need of it, directly money. That's a great thing. So you're a restaurateur, you're out of business right now. You've got a solvency problem because you can't pay your rent, you've laid off your staff and you can't reopen. Do you just lose your business? You've sort of loan. That kind of stimulus is what they want to do. It's also a way for them to kickstart universal basic income because the central bank can underpin the poorer parts of society by giving them money directly. It doesn't go on the government balance sheet. Now, central banks now believe they're omnipotent, that they can continue to expand balance sheets forever. MMT